Welcome to the library. My name is Matt. I'm the assistant director here. Before we get to tonight's speaker, I have a couple things I want to tell you about that are happening at the library. How many people realize that this month is library card sign-up month? Excellent. Excellent. So it's a national promotion that's going on every September. And we're actually having a friendly competition with some local libraries to see who can sign up the most people. So you can help bring a really fantastic trophy to Hooksett by signing up for a library card tonight, if you'd like. So please come see me in the back there. That's something you should be doing. Also something to mention, we have an award that we're trying to win through TD Bank. This is a grant that they supply to organizations that achieve it annually. This year we earned a $10,000 award from them. So if you have a TD Bank account, you can support us just by filling out this green form and putting it in the box over there. It doesn't cost you anything, and if we reach our goal of number of people that are Hooksett Library supporters, we can earn a fantastic grant like last year. Those funds are going to go towards revamping our children's facility, children's room upstairs. So something that we couldn't otherwise accomplish. So it's a really great program. We appreciate your support. We hope that you'll come out for more of our events in the near future. There's a bookmark on the back table there. There's some fantastic things coming up in October. We have a stargazing event. In 2 weeks, the New Hampshire Astronomical Society will be here with their amazing telescopes, and we'll be looking at the stars and planets and more. So I hope you'll join us for that one. We also have an artist and photographer exhibition. If you noticed the fabulous artwork in our downstairs hallways here, those artists will be here in this room and that room and doing a wonderful exhibit, so we hope you'll come out for that. And towards the end of the month, we actually have a co-sponsored program with the Historical Society that's going to be on the history of the Palace Theater in Manchester. So it should be very interesting. Award-winning local author Richard Patton will be presenting that program. It's celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Palace Theater, so it should be very, very nice program. That's on the 22nd of October.
I didn't think you'd speak this long, or I would start this meeting.
I am long-winded.
Yeah, you are.
Come on in, folks, please. Find a seat. There's some over here, some up front. So tonight's co-sponsors are the Historical Society and the Library. And of course, this event wouldn't be possible without the support of the New Hampshire Humanities Council. They provide over 650 programs like this each year around the state, educational and cultural programs that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So it's an amazing independent nonprofit organization that's made tonight possible. And you have some evaluations on your seats there. If you don't mind filling those out for them to give them a little bit of feedback, and you can join their mailing list and know about all of the other fantastic events coming up around the state. Okay. So that brings us to tonight's speaker. We're very fortunate to have Michael Tougias back for the second time. How many people came to his event here 2 years ago? He presented on the fatal forecast. A couple people. Excellent. Well, he was amazing that night, and we had a packed crowd as well, so we were very thrilled to have him back this year. He's going to be talking about his book and soon-to-be Disney movie, The Finest Hours. He's also the author and co-author of 24 books, so please check those books out in the back here and talk to Michael about those. Of course, you can buy a copy and have it signed tonight as well. So thank you so much, Michael, for being here tonight, and welcome to the library.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hi, good evening.
I'll tell you a little bit about this 1952 rescue at sea, which is regarded as the Coast Guard's greatest rescue in their history. It happened in the winter of 1952 when big nor'easter was off Cape Cod and 2 giant oil tankers split in half on the same day, almost in the same location. So you had 4 halves going down with 84 men lives at stake. And the book that I wrote with co-author Casey Sherman, we got lucky enough to have made into a Disney movie. So that will air January 29th, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I just have to tell you one story. I did an interview for the Boston Globe a few weeks ago, and the article ran. It was very nice. But they called me the master of disaster. Because I've written 6 books about survival at sea, and I was like, oh, I hate that phrase. So I had to mention to you that I have done books that are much lighter. One is called There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse. And the subtitle is The Vermont Misadventures of a Mountain Man Wannabe. It's kind of like Bill Bryce's A Walk in the Woods. This is about when I was age 22 to 24, trying to live at my cabin in way up by the Canadian border, like a mountain man who failed miserably. I still own the cabin though. And then a more recent one that I did with my daughter is titled The Cringe Chronicles, Mortifying Misadventures with My Dad. And Kristen was the lead writer, and she would send me her chapters, and I'd make suggestions, and I'd be cracking up. And then I finally got mad, and I said, wait a minute, you're putting all the blame for these disasters that we had on me. I said, part of it was your fault. And she said, okay, I got the perfect solution. At the end of each chapter, you get 2 pages called a dad's view. And so it really turned out to be a unique book because it has the point-counterpoint, if you will, from the father and the daughter on the same event. And then for my next book, this is a sign-up sheet if you'd like to get an announcement on it. I'll be doing a newsletter in December. My next book, I get back this for this half of the room, and you can keep this going around as I'm speaking. I'm getting back to my disaster roots with this next book. In 1942, off the mouth of the Mississippi, a few miles out, was a merchant ship with the Downs family on board, an 8-year-old boy, 11-year-old girl, and the parents. And a U-boat was there, sank the ship, and all 4 family members were blown into the ocean in different directions. And what the book does is it tells each person's survival story, but the chapters alternate between what's happening with their survival stories and what was happening on board the U-boat, because we have the U-boat commander's war diaries. So you get a little different perspective there. And so the chapters alternate going through this event and then throughout 1942. And that book will be called So Close to Home, because they had almost made it home. They were coming from South America, this family, and were just a few miles from port when they were hit by 2 torpedoes. So tonight's presentation is the one that I got lucky on, because Disney read the book, and a producer from the Boston area named Dorothy Alfiero got the 2 writers from the movie The Fighter. Does anybody remember that movie? It's about the fighter from Gold. And I don't go to the movies very often because usually I'm not too wild about how they turn out. But I did like that movie, so I got excited when I knew she was involved. And what they did was they filmed the entire movie in Massachusetts, which was great. Because I got to go and see it, and they did a lot of it on location in Chatham, Mass. And then at the old Quincy shipyard, they used one of the giant warehouses and converted it into a movie set. And the first time I walked in, I was just blown away, because in it, they had built this giant oil tanker, a giant pool that was going to be the ocean, and then they had the rescue boat there, and everything just like it was when I was writing the book. So it was amazing to see it kind of come to life that way. And Chris Pine plays the lead. He was the captain in Star Trek. And then Casey Affleck plays opposite him. He's on one of the parts of the sinking oil tanker. Now, the big difference between the movie and the book is the movie just focuses on one rescue, but in the book there's 4 rescues because you have 4 pieces of the ships. So Disney decided, 4 is way too complicated, and I agreed with them. Just focus on one, and they focused on the rescue of the Pendleton with Bernie Weber behind the rescue boat wheel. He's the hero of the movie. He's the one who Chris Pine does. So with the slides, what I do is take you through all 4 rescues, ending with the one that the movie's going to focus on. So then when the movie comes out January 29th, you'll be able to compare it to the actual story. These slides are from the event. We can dim the lights, and at the end, I'll be happy to answer any questions that I don't hit while I'm doing the discussion. But this map kind of gives you an idea of where the two oil tankers were when they split in half, and then where they drifted to after they split. The X marks the spot where the rescues were attempted. And I say attempted because not all the rescues were successful. There was definitely loss of life. Even though it's called the greatest rescue in Coast Guard history, they didn't save all 84 men. So I start with the Fort Mercer bow, which was in tough shape. So you can see the whole back section of the ship is gone. With the water coming in the bridge. On the first day, the waves were enormous, 50 feet, and they would sweep right over the structure. And the first casualty was the radio man who was trying to get to higher ground on the catwalk, swept into the ocean. Now, this ship, the Fort Mercer, did get out an SOS, whereas the other one that we're going to talk about, the Pendleton, did not. So that plays a role in the story as well. So when the SOS was received, Nantucket was closest to this particular ship, the Fort Mercer. And they sent out these 5 young coasties from Nantucket. Probably was a huge mistake to do this because it was several miles to the ship. And they're sending them out in a 36-foot boat. And the seas are 50 feet. They were lucky. They never even found the sinking ship. And the only thing that saved their lives was they did find a light ship. And a light ship is basically a floating lighthouse. It's a Coast Guard vessel that's meant to warn you off the shoals. And so in the storm, these men found that, and the men on the light ship, which is anchored, stationary, were able to rescue those 5 young coasties. So right off the bat, the rescue was not going well. The first rescue boat doesn't even make it to the tanker. Well, about 12 hours goes by, and finally a Coast Guard cutter arrives the next morning. The seas are still dangerous, but they're not as big. What they do is they shoot a line over, and then the men on the tanker pull this raft. And they pulled the raft, and 4 men jumped. You can see it's a considerable height. They landed around the raft, not in it. The water, of course, is freezing. It's 32 degrees. They're so hypothermic they can't manipulate their arms or their hands to hold onto the raft and get inside. All 4 are swept away. So again, so far the rescue is a disaster. The captain of this cutter, the name of the cutter was the Yuccutat. He decided, no more rescue by life rafts. It's not working. So they launched this small vessel, 22 feet in length, to go over and try to get a couple of the men off. And the real fun for me in doing these books is finding the people who were there after all these years, and then sitting down with them and just letting the tape recorder run. So, for example, with so close to home, the 8-year-old boy was blown off the ship when the submarine attacked. He's now 81, but he lives in Massachusetts, so I've been able to work with him on his experience. In this case, this gentleman standing up at the back here, his name was Gil Carmichael, and I searched for him all over. He turned up in Mississippi, and I called him, and he was like, after all these years, I can't believe somebody's asking about this. And his memory was just as clear as a bell, and I said, how can you remember so many details? And he said, you would too if you thought you were going to die. Yeah. And he said, I was scared as heck going over there because the seas were still big, and this is a little boat. He said, when we got to the oil tanker, 2 men jumped, they landed near us, they had on the old cork life jackets, covered with canvas, and he said we were able to pull them into the little vessel. And he said then a big wave came and it swept our boat into the steel hull of the tanker, and it cracked the wooden ribs. And he said, we're taking on water. There were still 2 men left on the oil tanker. We had to wave them, don't jump, don't jump. And he said, we raced back to the mothership before it sank. And this is them coming back. You can see there's one survivor here covered in a white blanket with his head and his arm. And I said to Gil, so what happened when you got back to the cutter? And he goes, I don't remember. And I go, why? You remembered everything else. He goes, well, they lowered the block and tackle to lift us up, and the wind was so strong, it was swinging. He said, it hit me right in the head and knocked me out. And he said, later, about an hour later, I wake up in my bunk, and I'm thinking to myself, I just had the most amazing dream. That I rescued 2 men off the sinking oil tanker. He really thought he was dreaming. And he said it wasn't until he went up on deck, and there's the oil tanker right in front of him still afloat, that he realized that it really happened. But he said he couldn't use this little rescue boat again because it was all stove in, as they say in Maine. And so they had to go back to the life rafts, and they shot the line over, the 2 remaining men tied it off, and those 2 men jumped. But the problem was, they're in the life raft, and you might even be able to see, there's one line going to the sinking oil tanker and one line coming back to the Coast Guard cutter. They're kind of trapped in between because they're so hypothermic, they can't manipulate their fingers to untie the rope, so they're trapped. And I did find a coastie named Bill Bleakley. He said, I was in the wheelhouse with the captain of the cutter, and the captain kind of throws up his arms in exasperation, like, what's next? And Bill said, I said, Captain, we have no choice but to back down. In other words, put it in reverse and hope the line breaks on the side towards the oil tanker so they can get these men. And Bill said, that's just what we did. He said, it was just terrifying. He said, because the tension on the line caused the life raft to come up in the air. And he said, we could see these 2 guys like hanging on for dear life. And then the line snapped, and luckily it snapped on the side towards the oil tanker. So he said, we hauled them in, and they were frozen stiff. He said some of our men had to go down the scramble nets and get them because they couldn't move. And what was interesting in this part of the research for the book was, no sooner did they get the last 2 men off. There's a slide here. They're getting the last guy off. Somebody shouts, look, look, and he's pointing back towards the oil tanker, and everybody looks, and this is what they saw. It's unbelievable. The whole thing just rears up in the air. I thought maybe it was going to flop over and capsize, but they said no. They said it reared up in the air and went straight down like a pile driver. And then this was the last photo taken before it disappeared. And I thought, how remarkable that this thing stayed afloat for 2 days, yet sank 5 minutes after the last 2 guys left. Because in these various books that I read, like Overboard, people criticize the captain of abandoning ship too early. And I'm always like, hey, you weren't on the ship. You never know exactly when it's going to go down. These fellows certainly didn't, but they got off in the nick of time. Now the other section of the Fort Mercer, the stern section, was in a little bit better shape. It wasn't at that steep angle, although you could see the jagged metal there. And it is amazing from 1952 that we have such crisp and clear photographs, and many are taken from the air, circling Coast Guard aircraft. This one. So there was a gentleman that lived here in New Hampshire for a while, and also in, I think it was Newburyport, Massachusetts. that was involved with this. His name was Lynn Whitmore. Lynn has passed away, but he was great to work with. Lynn is the tall one standing up next to the guy with the beard, and Lynn said, I was the radio operator who got the SOS from the Fort Mercer. And he said, you know, we were already out there in the storm looking for a missing fishing vessel. And it was interesting, I was doing this talk, and a woman was in the audience. It was her father who was on the missing fishing vessel that they never did find. So I never know who's in the audience related to the story. But Len said, and he said, the problem was we were on an ice cutter, not a rescue type of cutter. And I said, how does an icebreaker break the ice? I always wondered, does it ram it? And he said, no, you slide your bow up on the ice and the weight of it breaks it. And I said, well, what if you slide up and the ice is too thick? He said, I'll send you a picture. This is what he sent. He said, we blow it up. And he said, then we slide the bow. And so he said, we were used to doing this kind of work, not so much rescues and searches. And he said, but we did go on scene, and this is them arriving. So this is the east wind, and that's the sinking stern. And Lynn said, you know, for lack of anything better, we sent over the life raft like the other vessel did, and one man jumped. He didn't, if you see here, it's not quite, I think there's another slide. The distance isn't quite as far to jump. So he jumps in the raft, and when they're pulling him back, a big wave rolled under it, and Lynn said it actually flipped the guy up in the air like a pizza, and he landed back in the raft by luck. And that's when the captain of the East Wind, I think his name was Captain Peterson, said, no more rescue by raft. And he was making a calculated decision that the ship would stay afloat until a vessel from Portland, Maine, called the Acushnet could get us. And the Acushnet did arrive. There's that one guy who jumped. That they got him and they bundled him up hypothermic just because of the time in the wet life raft. So that's the Acushnet arriving in the background, and the captain on board was named John Joseph. Now, unfortunately, he had passed away when I was doing the research, but his family, I was able to contact them, and I said, did he ever tell you a story? And they said he did one better. He wrote it up in the first person account, and he tried to sell it to Reader's Digest. They never bought the story, but we've kept it. And I was like, oh, Cindy, that's like me sitting down with him having a cup of coffee and hearing what happened. So it was this great first-hand account. And he said how he asked permission from the captain of the bigger cutter, can I try to pull up alongside it, which would be really dangerous because you've got big seas, you know, one would be going up, the tanker would be going up, the rescue vessel would be like this. And he's talking about pulling up within 3 feet so that the men could jump off. And he actually pulled it off. And in his account, he said men wouldn't jump at first, you know, too dangerous. And I'm wondering how he did it. And then further in the article, he explained a couple of his guys reached out and grabbed the guy and hauled him onto the cutter. And then when the others saw he was safe, they started to jump until one sailor hit a patch of ice on the deck of the rescue boat and slid all the way to the other side and was partially hanging onto the, I guess they call it the lifelines. And they rescued him, but the last 13 men on the sinking oil tanker saw that, and they would not leave the vessel. They said, we're not going. And John Joseph was really credited with, you know, they called it the maneuver of the ages. Here he is with one of the people who jumped later. And a big help with the story in terms of research was local newspapers would interview the survivors from their hometown. So at the time I was doing the research, this is a good 12 years ago, I was working at a company in Boston, a job I didn't like, and I'd sneak out on my lunch break. I'd pretend I was going to a meeting, run to the Boston Public Library, and I'd bring up the microfiche from every newspaper in the country, and several had eyewitness accounts from survivors. So I just hit the print button and then run back to work like I had come back from a meeting. And it allowed me to get a real lot of research done just by looking at these old newspapers. You know, for example, the New Orleans Times-Picayune had an account from 2 survivors from their hometown.
Were these tankers U.S. flag?
They were both U.S. tankers, and they were, I'll talk about them in a little more detail later, but they were the T2 oil tankers, was the proper name. Here's some of the survivors. Why don't we hold up the questions to the end? These are 3 men, but they're in borrowed clothing. You know, they've been rescued, they're hypothermic, and they're in the borrowed clothing. And then there, on the upper deck, you see one of the men waving, and he's basically saying to this aircraft, "I'm okay, I'm okay." And it turned out, amazingly, the 13 men who stayed on board made the right call. The stern section never sank, which is a good tip if you're ever on a cruise, get a room in the stern. Time and time again in my research, that comes up, that the stern will stay afloat much longer than the bow. But anyways, and they even had power. So amazingly, the company that owned these was the Kaiser Company, I believe. But the company that owned these, they decided this is worth money, so they towed it to Newport, Rhode Island. And Acosti later said, "Hey, I was involved in the rescue, and I happened to be in Newport because I had a hitchhike there, and there's the oil tanker in the harbor that I just risked my life out in the ocean to save." And he said, "I went with all the media to interview these survivors, who we thought would be half dead and hypothermic." And he said, "When we got on board, they welcomed us with a bacon and eggs breakfast because they had power." And you'll see in the book that the company then welds this half of the tanker to a bow of another tanker, some scrap, and sends it back out to sea a year later. And its fate is not good. It's just crazy what they did. So you have the stern and the bow of the Fort Mercer going on over a 2-day period, simultaneous. A little closer to shore, closer to Chatham, is the Pendleton rescue. And the reason Disney did some of the filming down at Chatham was the Coast Guard station really hasn't changed much from the 1950s to today. Here's how it looks today. But it was funny, they were filming in January, and to make a blizzard, they had to shoot snow in the air, and if they had waited 3 weeks, they would have got more snow than ever. Yeah. But when they were there, they had to bring in these big snow guns and recreate the scene. So at the station, some people in town heard a ship's distress whistle, and then they had some rudimentary radar at the station, and the commander, Daniel Clough, sees, the blip on the radar. He calls headquarters. They send a plane out. The pilot at first says, "Oh my God, it must be part of the Fort Mercer." And then he goes lower and he can't believe it. The words Pendleton are written. You know, and his words back on the radio were something to the effect, "You're not going to believe this, but apparently a second oil tanker is split in half, and it's coming right towards Monomoana in Chatham." So the first thing Clough does is he sends out Donald Bangs, who's in the light-colored hat there, and this is his crew. And it was interesting, the newspapers didn't give Bangs much ink, but I certainly did in the book, because he was sent out to the bow, and this is what the bow looked like. And he got there at night, and one man jumped, and they couldn't get him. The waves were just too big. And then nobody else came out, and instead of, heading in, because nobody else is going to jump. He stayed out there all night in a 36-foot boat in 50-foot seas, circling this tanker in case there was anybody else on the river. And we do know, in hindsight, there were 6 others on board, but it will always be a mystery of what happened to them, because they never came out when Bangs was there. We had the searchlight and everything. And, well, I'll get to it later, but it's a mystery, it still is today. I'll come back to that at the end. So the area where this is happening would be right in this area. Bangs came out of Stage Harbor and came around Monomoy and went this way. But the next rescue boat is going to have to come down off of the old fish pier, just at the top of the map. And the person who has to do that is Bernie Webber. So Bernie's the hero of the upcoming Disney movie, because the station commander, Club, turns to Bernie, who's in the station. He goes, "Webber, pick yourself a crew. You got to go out now to the stern." And Bernie'd been in the station that day, saw when Bangs had to go out. And Bernie told me, I thought he was sending Bangs on a suicide mission. I thought it was the worst decision to send a 36-foot boat into these seas. And now he's telling me to do it at night. And I don't even have my own crew. I got to pick a crew because it's kind of a ragtag, skeleton crew there because all the resources are engaged. And Bernie said, luckily I never had to pick. He said, three guys volunteered. And I said, why is that lucky? And he said, I didn't want to say you, and you come because they might be coming to their death. He said, I really did not think we'd survive the night. And in this photo, that's Bernie, and this is one of the men that joined up, Richard Livesey. I spent a lot of time with him, and Andy Fitzgerald. They volunteered, and then a third man who's not in the picture, Irving Mast, volunteered as well. And Irving, I always thought, a true hero. He could have kept his mouth shut. Nobody would have thought the worst, because he wasn't even part of Chatham Station. He just happened to be there waiting to get back to the lightship after the storm subsided. So he wasn't even part of the station, yet he volunteered. And so they have to leave from the pier up in Chatham and go south and go over the dreaded Chatham Bar. It's the shallow area. These big rollers come in, and when they hit it, they explode because they're hitting relatively shallow water. And the fish pier, some of the movie was filmed there. It's not too different. And then they headed south in relatively calm waters, but they can hear in the distance the waves crashing. And, they always have, like on TV, these heroes be these superheroes. Well, these guys weren't like this. They were afraid. In fact, they were so afraid they started singing to calm their nerves because they know they're going into this crashing area. And this is the vessel they're in, so it's 36 feet in length, number 500. Bernie would have been standing behind the windshield at the wheel, and Andy would be up here. There was even another little compartment up in the front. And a lot of paintings were done of them leaving. And this is their route. And we don't have any photos when they get to the Chatham Bar because it's night. So I asked the Coast Guard, okay, what would it look like, with breaking waves at a bar? And they sent me this. This is the Columbia Bar. I'm going to be going there soon, so it's going to be interesting to see. But this vessel is bigger than Bernie's boat. It was a 47. A 47. This one's a 47. And look what happens. The waves just stand it up, and the bow is pointing towards the heavens. And then the following surge rolls it. They did survive because they had the surf belts on. I said to Bernie, is this what happened to you? And he said, no, not quite, he said, although this picture is very accurate, he said, we had a searchlight so we could see these waves. And it's funny, it's been a while since I've read the book, and I just reread it last week, and there was a quote from Irving Mass later, many years later. He wouldn't talk about it to his family, and one night he and his daughter are watching A Perfect Storm, and you know how the vessel goes with the big wave. First time he ever talked to her about it was he turned to his daughter and he said, that's exactly what it was like. And she was like, the thing you got the medal for, and that's all he ever said. And he never went near the ocean again, or the water, for that. It was weird, but you'll see that in the book, some of the after effects of what happens. But anyways, Bernie said, we tried to get over the breaking waves, and it just hurled us backwards. And he said, it actually busted out the windshield. And he said, and the water came through and it swept the compass away. And I said, well, what about other navigation? He said, there was no other means of navigation in 1952. All we had was the compass. And I always thought, up to that point, even though what they're doing is brave, I wouldn't call them